Our first entry in the FFPC Main Event for 2024. That's what we're drafting today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find my newsletter, bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work at RotoViz. It continues to come out, the Player Target Series. I think that's what you called it, something like that. And I've enjoyed the heck out of it. So many player-focused articles that have been great. You've had a lot of other great stuff, too. And this week you've been working on the zero RB countdown. The start of that is coming, so that's exciting.
I may be a little bit weird during the recording simply because, I mean,
you've been writing all day.
I have been, and Ben, you know this about your own work, but sometimes you can forget that it's just fantasy football, and you're like, I got to get this all right. This is the most important article I'll ever write, and that actually is not the best way to be thinking about it. So trying to relax, have fun with it. I did get the first one finished. It's off to Blair. I'm going to publish it a little bit later this evening. Ben, we are drafting on Tuesday afternoon. You just released preseason week 2 stealing signals. I'm sure that some of those notes will come into play as we work through our draft here. And I mean, I'm assuming you're going to be right, because, I mean, again, no pressure like we just talked about, but there's $1 million at stake here. That's
right. The main event, for anyone who's a more recent listener or any of those things, is, the high stakes. I think probably it's the biggest prize pool, right? High stakes contest in the industry. I was going to say the top one, if you will. Our friends over at FFPC put this on. It's a $2,000, buy-in. It is $1 million to first place. It is a super fun contest. Shawn, you and I last year had a team that made it to the shootout that was in second place heading overall to win $1 million. Heading into the final Sunday of week 17, the last day of the fantasy football season. We would have needed certain things to break certain ways. We'd already had some players play on Thursday and Saturday on that week, so we were a little bit shorthanded against some of the other top teams. But when you're in second place, you're in second place. There's not a lot of.
I think people have the spoiler, though, which is that we did not win.
We did not win. We finished 30th because I think 3 or 4 of our players scored single digits, and you just can't have that when you're talking about the best fantasy teams in the world at that point. That was one of the things we were somewhat excited about, was due to some injuries, some of those things. We had actually some unique players in our build relative to some of the other guys. We had some guys that helped us get there. We were also starting some guys that were kind of busts. We had to throw Kyle Pitts into our lineup that week. We were starting DeAndre Swift, who wasn't obviously what we were hoping for most of the year last year. But to get there and be in a position where if those guys gave you one good week, and we knew that they had that in them, you could potentially win the whole thing. Instead, the really popular Kyren Williams had the monster Sunday game, and that helped a lot of Kyren Williams teams elevate. I had another team with our buddy Evan Silva that had Kyren Williams on it, and that jumped into the top 10. Mine and your team, Shawn, fell behind a little bit, which was unfortunate, but we were I was bummed as I had this other Kyren team jumping in the top 10. I was bummed because that team was blocked. It didn't have a chance to win. You want to win. Mine and your team had a shot, had a path going into the final day to win. It did not happen. But we're starting over again. It starts today, Shawn, with a 103. For those following along on YouTube, we have already made the pick. And we went a little bit of a unique direction here. I was talking to you before. I was like, what are you thinking on this pick? How are you feeling? And you were feeling a little bit different than I was anticipating. I was thinking immediately, McCaffrey, Lamb, Tyreek Hill is his top 3. But I've been pushing this Bijan Robinson narrative all offseason. You're like, don't you want to take Bijan Robinson, Ben? And that's where we went.
Yeah, I didn't tell you at the time that was to block you from recommending Kyle Pitts later.
I mean, we're at the 103, so this is tight end premium. We're heading back. It's heading back towards us in the second round. Trey McBride went as the first tight end off the board, something that we have talked about being in favor of. He went 203 in this draft. Kyle Pitts tends to go in the later third round. So to take him, we would have needed to pony up at 303 and make sure we got him early in the third round, that could have been in play. It might still be in play, Shawn. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah, and I have really come around to the idea that that's not a bad pick. I think the only, you get a pick in the top 4, especially probably the top 5. You got to be really excited in this format. I would say that there's a pretty substantial tier break after 5, although it's been interesting to watch Amon-Ra St. Brown go very early in some of the drafts I've done recently. We like him. It's just sort of a matter of volume there. But Ben, if you have a pick in the top 5 here, there are some scenarios in which if you're not aggressive at tight end, you really come to regret it later. There are also some scenarios where if the right guy falls to you, I mean, George Kittle has an ADP of 411. If we could take him at 410 in this draft, I would be over the moon. The problem is that if you plan on that and he doesn't make it, it's similar to what just happened, where we wanted Dalton Kincaid at the 210, he goes 209.
Yeah, Kincaid tends to go in this late second range. We were pretty excited about potentially grabbing him there. He goes one pick ahead of us. That is a little bit of a problem. The faller for me at wide receiver is Drake London. We have Bijan. The other pick for me, Shawn, is probably Nico or Jalen Waddle, who are 2 strong picks. I don't feel like I have a great feel for FFPC ADP yet. I've suggested some guys a little high, so you let me know if I'm exuberant on any of these players.
Well, Kupp is probably the guy ahead of the non-London picks. Is he someone you'd be looking at here, or do you think he's still a little bit down?
Who was that?
Cooper Kupp.
He's in this tier for me, for sure. If you want to take Kupp, let's do it. I mean, he's a big swing. I have had him a little bit still behind. I'm still trying to figure out all of that, with Puka Nacua still going at the 1-2 turn, expected to be ready. I do think there's some ways this season plays out now where if Puka starts a little slow, has missed all of August, and Kupp just reestablishes himself as the lead guy, the number 1, the star again. Like, there's going to be inertia with that when Nacua comes back. He's going to be able. They're going to ride him as far as he. I mean, he's been their guy. Obviously, they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, to 2021. Obviously, with Kupp being, I guess, 4 seasons ago now. With Kupp being the central, I don't know how you say that, 3 seasons. Kupp being the central piece of the whole offense, obviously.
Are you giving any weight to the reports that Kupp was dominating in terms of how practice targets were being doled out before Puka got hurt?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you have to.
I wouldn't be, other than Kupp has been like that good in the past. Yeah. Where, I mean, if there's one guy other than, like a CeeDee Lamb, what have you, Justin Jefferson, who would be dominating Puka, you're like, well, I mean, probably Cooper Kupp.
You had Kupp in your Apex draft, which was in one of your recent articles. At the bottom, it was kind of tucked away, and you were talking about something sort of unrelated. I think you were talking about maybe Kyron, and we're almost back on the clock here, but you had said once Kupp comes off the board, but then I looked at that draft that you had played, and you had taken Kupp ahead of all of these guys, Drake London and Olave and all those guys. We're back up. We'll talk about that in a sec, talk more about Kupp. So no tight ends go. We do have Mark Andrews still on the board. I already have 2 shares of him main events with our buddies Pat and Pete, who want to take him anywhere they can. We could definitely take him here because I do think the tight end is an important piece of all of this. In the tight end premium format, it's an important piece of the early rounds. Devon Achane did go with the turn. The best running back available, probably Travis Etienne. Nico Collins did not go. Jalen Waddle did not go. Waddle matches Kupp's buy, but those are 2 solid options as well. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I'm probably with Debo or Waddle.
Neighbors. Okay.
Yeah, or Malik Neighbors, definitely.
I mean, those are all in the same tier for me with Nico, all those guys. So We got 2 seconds here. Go ahead and pull a trigger. Okay, we go Debo there.
So one of the things here is that I don't like that we didn't pick Jalen Waddle, given that we also didn't pick Tyreek Hill. And I think there's a really strong argument that, I mean, if you're in that spot, you got to come out of the draft with one of them. And yet...
Or Achane.
Or Achane. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Waddle, I think, is going to have like a overall wide receiver 5 season sometime in the next 3 years. He was on that main event team that you referenced in the intro, and he didn't do a ton for us. And I mean, he's one of these guys where I do think nagging injuries are going to be a part of the weekly issue with him. Now, I say that we took somebody in Deebo Samuel who is going to get banged up as well. The tiebreaker for me was after I made the Cup pick. It just isn't, even in managed, it's not ideal to start off with those 2 week 6 wide receivers, especially Ben, when the Kansas City Chiefs guys are also going to be on our radar.
Right. Yeah, I didn't love that buy element. And yeah, you mentioned it with Waddle. He had a really big week 15 game. He got hurt in week 16, had a 50-yard catch early in that game, did nothing else the rest of the game, only ended up playing 28 snaps, 43% of their snaps in that game. That was during the sprint, the way the playoffs work in this format, for anyone who's not aware, is when I was talking about us being in second place heading into week 17, it's because we got our average score from the regular season plus all the points we scored in week 15, all the points we scored in week 16, and then those early games in week 17, the Thursday and Saturday night games I was referencing. And so we had some really big outcomes already in week 15 and 16 to be up there. This sprint has, I think it was 700 or 800 teams in it. And it's the overall, score at that point. And we were right there near the top. What you're referencing is one of the frustrating things coming out of week 16 is we could have been in an even better position. We could have been in first and potentially kind of going away. If Waddle stays healthy, he's not somebody that was on those other very, very top teams. If he stays healthy in that week 16 game, does a little more. And then also because he was out week 17, I was forgetting who the guy was that was out, but because he was out, that's why we ended up dipping into Kyle Pitts was a flex for us in the tight end premium format, largely because I can't remember who we were deciding between, Sean, but I made the case that if Kyle Pitts, he didn't, essentially because of the tight end premium, didn't have to hit in the same way. And both of the 2 options we had were not really huge ceiling games, but it's like if he could somehow catch, even just 6 passes for 80 yards, in tight end premium, you get 9 points for those 6 receptions. The 80 yards gets you to 17. And then it's like, well, you could mix in, you'd love to mix in 2 touchdowns with that too. You're up at 29 points right there. Like that's a 30-point game at tight end, 6 for 80 and 2. So it was like, I mean, if Kyle Pitts could just do that one time, like obviously, we think he has that in him. That's not saying he has to get 200 yards in a game. Unfortunately, he had a really poor game, and as you like to point out, had a shot at a deep pass that he just didn't seem to really try for.
He didn't put his arms out. Now, I'm assuming that there's a little bit of an optical illusion, right? And that there was just actually no way he could catch it. But the not putting his arms out is maybe the very final piece that broke me, Ben.
That was rough. I know it stuck with you for a while because I kind of let it go, but it's definitely come up. We didn't get particularly close to winning. If it was a thing where we just needed that catch from Pitts, it would have been a little tougher. The Richie James one from a couple years ago, where if Daniel Jones just doesn't miss Richie James on a crosser in the playoff contest, we win the playoff contest. That one has stuck with me because it was literally the one play. He was wide open. I mean,
I think we would have finished second, but
okay.
Yes,
in my mind, it will always be first.
It was heartbreaking we didn't catch it.
So we did take Deebo, Sean. One of the reasons that Deebo wasn't really on my radar at that point was that you had talked about George Kittle's ADP being in a range where we could potentially get him at 410. And that is something that we want to be able to consider here. We're right now at the 312. A lot can happen. Andrews and Pitts both went in the 3rd round. But on the way back, 3 of the drafters right in the 4 in front of us have taken a tight end. One of them took 2. The Kelsey drafter took Andrews in the second round. A couple of the others just in front of them had taken tight ends already. Any of these guys could take a second tight end, just like the Kelsey drafter took Andrews. People who like to take early tight ends often will take 2. But you could maybe see some scenarios where Kittle comes back. Do you have concerns stacking Debo and Kittle on the same build? Or is that something that's like, in your mind, a leverage off of we have Bijan and not CMC, and so we're kind of thinking through some scenarios where maybe CMC misses some time and San Francisco's forced to pass a little bit more this year?
Yeah, I like that element of it. I think that for me, when we're talking about the 2 different positions, certainly they could both go off. You think of the full 3-week race where it's a little bit less of simply a 1-week element. I think they both could score well. They give you potentially together even a little bit more floor as we work through trying to make sure we advance out of the league. Sometimes you can get very caught up in how do we build the team with the absolute most upside, which is something you definitely need to do. But lose track of the fact that our first objective is to, finish in that top spot through 12 weeks. We're going to have the 12 regular season. Weeks 13 and 14 are the league playoffs. And then 15, 16, 17, the race for the big money. Samuel and Kittle are undervalued as it is. Kittle substantially. And Ben, if Brandon Ayuk doesn't end up on this team, and as we get closer to the season, we're starting to get into that range where I think you start to get nervous about the guys who haven't practiced yet.
Yeah.
Both because there's some risk even if they do sign, but then also, it was such a bad play for Le'Veon Bell to hold out the season that it just never seemed like it was realistic. And then it happened. So, we'll see. If Brandon Ayuk ends up on a different team, these guys are they're league-winning plays and then tournament-winning plays. In that context, I don't mind having them together.
The Le'Veon Bell one, refresh me what happened there. He held out, and then he just had a really tough year.
Well, he held out.
Oh, like into the
season. And then he came back.
D'Angelo Williams had the big year that year. Is that right? When did he come back? He came back week 1. No, so the year he held out, he came back week 1, right?
No, he held out. And James Conner exploded, and Le'Veon Bell was never the same again.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was forgetting that timeline a little bit.
And he's like, well, that's why I held out, because I was worried I was going to never be the same again.
Oh, he missed the whole season with a contract dispute. He just didn't play in 2018. And then was on the Jets in 2019. I forgot that timeline. That's fascinating. He came back in 2017, right at the start of the season. Maybe missed week 1 or something. And then in 2018, he just missed the whole year. Fascinating. At least on his Pro Football Reference page, it says missed season contract dispute right on there. It's fascinating. I forgot that.
James Conner, 1,470 yards from scrimmage, 13 combined touchdowns.
Yeah, that was the big year for Conner. I forgot that was because of a Le'Veon Bell full season holdout. Like that whole element of it, for whatever reason. I know I wasn't on him much that year. Or at least I think I wasn't. I don't know. I guess my content from that year is out there somewhere. But as I recall, it didn't stick with me as something that crushed my season or anything. So I kind of moved on from it. But I don't think I was on James Conner much either. It's one of those ones where you're like, it's sort of similar to the Dolphins thing you said, where, if you're not on one, you should be on the other in some spots. All right, we are a few picks away. Kittle's still coming back. So I agree with you on the IU concern about him still holding out. I do think it's very likely that he winds up back in San Francisco, and I think it's mostly an early season bump for Debo and Kittle at this point. I do think it is going to be a bump for them. It's going to help us get off to a fast start. That's part of why I wasn't listing Debo is one of my top available options there. I don't mind that we passed on Nico because I think there's a lot of options to then get into Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs later. Diggs, especially on FFPC, seems to slide. And so it's like, okay, well, I mean, don't necessarily want to. Some of this comes down to like how you want to play the different offenses. We didn't take London. We took Kupp in part because, and you mentioned not really wanting to take Pitts because you're already making this big bet on Bijan. Some of that stuff is going to be directionally correlated, but it's also in some cases like you just want the one player to be the guy scoring all the touchdowns, right? And so Kupp is the guy. When we take him for the Rams, one of the reasons I really like that pick, Kyron's already off the board, Puka's already off the board. We don't have another Ram discussion for rounds and rounds and rounds and rounds. So Evan Ingram did just go. We're 3 picks away. The Debo one is where it gets a little trickier. We're like, it could have been Neighbors, it could have been some other guys. Ken Walker goes. He's one I would have floated to you as an option as well if Kittle does go. The drafter who took Kincaid, 1 pick ahead of us, has started Tyreek at 4, which we would have done if somebody took Bijan at 3. Kincaid and then Neighbors right after us when we took Debo. It looks very much like a draft that either of us could have taken. He takes Allen to pair with Kincaid, which I think makes a lot of sense there. Are we rushing to the podium to take Kittle with Debo, or do you have a reason?
I think so, but I mean, now I do kind of wish. I mean, I said those things about the 249ers together. I wish we had taken Malik Neighbors. Yeah, I like Kittle here. The other name that I really like is Rashee Rice.
Neither of the guys behind us has a tight end. One has 3 receivers already. One has 3 running backs. Kind of question which of those is more likely to take Rashee Rice. It's probably the 3 receiver team, to be honest with you. Stephon Diggs is also still available, Sean. I know you would love to just take Brock Bowers at 503, but I mean, I think we're kind of pushing him up at that spot. I think it's Kittle for me. It is aggressive to have both the Niners, but we have options here on the way back. If Rice goes, I like the Rice call, but we can still take Diggs. We can also still take Tank Dell. I know you really like Zay Flowers. I'm really into T. Higgins at this point. He's been having an incredible camp. People are talking about him that cover the team as if he's going to have the best season of his career. There's a nice group of receivers here. I would love to get Rice. I like that point. He did go at the turn.
Colin and I drafted. Ooh,
the turn went Rice Diggs.
Dead.
Colin and I drafted. What was that?
We did a main event that is up on the OT feed, and your boy there and referenced by Colin. Rashee Rice went 401, which I think is closer to where he really should be.
412.
Right.
Oh, so around 401 on yours.
Yes. Right.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, and we responded by also later in the draft, obviously reaching significantly to get Xavier Worthy. Yeah, T. Higgins, the 2 people we were kind of looking at went. T. Higgins, I mean, I don't think that he's as good as Zay Flowers. I don't think that he is, I say is good. Flowers and Dell are electric, but one is the number 3 and one is in an offense where they're just never going to throw the ball. So I think T. Higgins is the tournament winning play here.
That's who I have ranked ahead of them. I go T, then Tank, then Zay. I have them back to back to back. But I got asked the other day if I still had Rice down because he's kind of moving up slowly in some of these formats, or where I would have him if I knew he wasn't going to get suspended. And I said I'd have him a tier higher, and I had Rice below them. I'm bummed we didn't get Rice there. I had answered that question the other day that I'd have him somewhere between Debo and Ayuk, the 2 San Fran players. Ayuk sliding into the 4th. I think Rice is a 3rd round pick, probably. You mentioned him going at 401 and a tight end premium.
Well, if you saw him go in this draft, if you didn't know anything about him doing his Fast and the Furious routine, if you saw him go between Marvin Harrison and Chris Olave in round 2, I mean, that's more or less what you argued early in the offseason. And it's exactly what looked, I mean, I was kind of joking. I did we labeled this week's Best Ball Banana Stand 5 reasons to be cautious of Xavier Worthy. He did actually make a ton of mistakes in a very short period of time there in that preseason game. He also looked like he was going to gain about 1,200 yards. So that's probably the more important element. Rashee Rice looked like he was going to lead the NFL in targets. He was targeted on 4 plays in a row at one point.
Right. Yeah, I wrote that up very favorably in that aforementioned preseason stealing signals write-up. What's fascinating about that is, when you referenced that take that I had pre-draft, that Rashee Rice, who was going at the time on the Underdog drafts, he was going at the 2-3 turn. I argued he should be right behind Puka Nacua at the end of the 1-2 turn. Puka Nacua was going 110 or 111. Nacua had this incredible rookie year that we've obviously talked a lot about, but I was already making the case in Shawn, largely based on some of your conversation about tying him to Anquan Boldin in season last year, which I still think is such a great comp. If you go look at Anquan Boldin's career, I've made this point on Stealing Bananas, feels like 7 times this offseason, referencing your Anquan Boldin comp. So a lot of the listeners are like, yeah, we know what you're saying. It was one of Anquan Boldin's best seasons. He went on to have a really strong, long career. I think Puka Nacua is going to be a very good long-term wide receiver at the NFL level. I also think last year is going to go down as one of his best seasons. I don't think he's going to build off of that in a way that he's putting up significantly better seasons year in and year out. I mean, if I had to bet, I would. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of seasons to come in his career, but I would put his rookie year as likely.
There's a pretty good chance it'll be the number 1.
It's the best season of his career. Pretty good chance. So that was part of the take. But he had this incredible rookie year, and you should expect him to continue to be a really good player and a good offense. Rashee Rice also had an incredible rookie year, especially when you look at the per route stuff, when you look at the fact that he didn't run a full slate of routes until week 14, but he got 8 games from that point forward, 4 in the regular season, 4 in the postseason. There's some concern about how, what he does in the offense and how much stuff he can actually do and how a lot of it was manufactured and all of those things. But that stuff all existed underneath the ways that defenses are playing Patrick Mahomes, his cover 2 shells, these things that weren't going to go away. I had all those takes before even the Hollywood Brown and Xavier, certainly Xavier Worthy acquisitions. Those acquisitions do change the target math a little bit. But a big part of the point was like, if we're taking Travis Kelce in the 4th round in these early underdogs, then the Travis Kelce, either Kelce's going to smash that ADP or that area, that short to intermediate range, is going to open up, and that's where Rashee Rice is the heir apparent of all of that work. When you mentioned that first preseason game, it's the thing that I've been trying to talk about all offseason, where Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice are the perfect complementary players in this offense. They used Worthy on a jet motion. I believe it was a handoff end around, not a tip pass. They also used him on a swing pass. That's the stuff that we've talked about that they'll do with him, like they did with Kadarius Toney, like they did with Mecole Hardman beforehand. They did some of it with Sky Moore. And then they also chucked a deep to him multiple times, right? Like he ends up scoring on a TD from Carson Wentz. He's going to have this like barbell target distribution. He's going to get line of scrimmage targets and then 15 plus targets. He'll get some in between as well. But KC's had receivers in those roles, and it seems like they were acquiring him for that similar role, and Hollywood Brown, so that they could really have 2 options to threaten defenses vertically and continue to force extra safeties onto the field, nickel packages, dime packages. It opens up the rushing for Isaiah Pacheco. But what it really opens up is those underneath passes. So anyway, what I wrote up in the preseason thing, Shawn, is exactly that take. Is they went deep to Xavier Worthy, and then everything was just there underneath to Rashee Rice. He got 3 catches on the next 4 plays, and just matriculated it down the field. It's like, we're going to show this speed, and you're going to have to respect it every snap because you don't want to give up the explosives. And then when teams start to clamp down on Rashee Rice a little bit, and they will, obviously you're going to have Kelce running these routes as well. Suddenly Xavier Worthy is going to be in single coverage down the field. I mean, it's going to be really difficult to defend. And if you're not getting exposure to Kansas City wide receivers at these prices, you're going to regret it. Now, the one that I was a little surprised with here, Shawn, is that you weren't super into Tank Dell. You didn't seem super into Diggs. You didn't seem super into Nico. My other takeaway from preseason week 2, like this, was like it's too easy for CJ Stroud. He's able to read they're doing the same stuff that defenses are doing to Mahomes, but Stroud is reading it out. They went shotgun 5 wide from the 1 yard line. They tried to run it from the 1 yard line after an interception, and Dameon Pierce couldn't get anywhere. So on 2nd and 10 from the 1 in his own end zone, they went 5 wide, no protection, no back, no tight end, and just said, all right, we're going to drop you in a shotgun in the end zone where you can't retreat, and you're like at great risk of getting a safety, and give you 5 receivers, and you'll figure it out. And his first read got manhandled. I think it was Diggs. It might have been Tank. Got manhandled, and he just quickly navigated back to Dalton Schultz in the middle of the field, hit him. Like he backed up a little bit because the pocket was collapsing, reset his feet, hit Dalton Schultz, calm as you can be, from his own end zone on shotgun 5 wide. Like, it's too easy for CJ Stroud. It should not be this easy for him. He can find whatever he wants in every secondary look.
So should the over-under for Stroud in 2024 be set at Peyton Manning's 2013 season?
I mean, yeah. Like, I don't know which of these guys is going to do more. I think Stroud's going to do more. Xavier Worthy goes 603 here, Sean. That was going to be the hope that he might make it all the way back to us. There's a draft out of the 10 hole that started AJ Brown, Trey McBride, Waddle, Devonta Smith, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy.
That's a bummer. I don't like competing with that team.
No, that's a good team. And got.
I think you can just take out their first round pick. I mean, he's not even going to be in the starting lineup.
Waddle at 310. We were considering at 303. Tank Dell at 510. I'm talking about why didn't we consider him at 503? Trey McBride as the tight end 1 at 203. Devonta Smith at 403. Sean, you're absolutely in love with. Xavier Worthy at 6. But he might be using your ranks with that high. I was going to say this looks like mine, but the Devonta Smith pick especially. Certainly, I think somebody who's listened to an episode of Stealing Bananas before, I would guess, if I had to guess.
I mean, to be honest, Xavier Worthy, if it weren't for the fact that his ADP, again, just in the last couple of days, you can find that on the RotoViz ADP tools for the FFPC various contests. Just in the last couple of days, 610, right? So if we take him at 503, we're kind of eliminating the idea that we could ever get Higgins and Worthy. But I do like Worthy over Higgins, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I told you I just moved Rashee Rice up higher because I'm getting to test this right now, and I was very comfortable taking Rice over those guys, even over Diggs. When you brought that up, I was like, yeah, I mean, my only thought was I think we can maybe push him around the turn, and then we didn't get him, and then I was really upset. God, I need to rank him higher. That's my, if I'm bummed that I missed a dude because somebody reached on him, then I just don't have him ranked high enough. I need to
again, you make the best picks when you're on the clock. But if Dalton Kincaid gets to us at 210, then we get a little bit of a cascade effect where we're able to take our fun players as opposed to having to take. I say having to take. George Kittle is the single best value in this format. So you should never be regretting having to take somebody at 410 who frankly just straight up is better than the guy we were going to take at 210. So you could say that we got rescued inadvertently there. I do regret not having those players you mentioned on our team, though.
Yeah. It is somewhat of a bummer. So how far are you dropping Keenan Allen with the fat jokes? Because he is on the board. The other one that's on the board, I don't even want to say his name. Where does Brock Bowers go? Okay, Roman Dunze goes ahead of Keenan Allen. That's where we're at with the fat shaming of Keenan Allen.
But then I mentioned this. Yes. Oh, we're up. Good. Yeah, I don't want to take him here, but I did hear plenty of reports that other people are like, I don't know what they're talking about. He looks fine. Just Shane Waldron.
I don't think it's
coordinator.
I think it's like a 5% issue at most, and it's the range of the outcomes that you're already screwed, right? But let's not take him here. My question is, do we want to go like Jaden Reed, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, or do we want to save that Green Bay pick? I thought you were gonna want to take Bowers with Kittle. No.
Do you want to take? Are you comfortable taking them together?
Yeah. Yeah, we take Bowers there. Reed or JSN would be great for me. I mean, so the way that my rankings say it right now is Keenan Allen at the top, then JSN, then Reed. I do have one of my big tier breaks between there. I'm, a little bit more concerned about the Packers passing game. Do like to play it through the cheaper options, as you said, save that pick, as in like Dontavian Wicks later potentially. And I think I do prefer that. So getting Bowers there leaves us open to get potentially JSN at 703. I think Keenan Allen at 703 is a really nice pick too. But we could take Reed over Allen if you're. I mean, I'm okay with that. I'm going to be moving Allen down. I don't want like all my subscribers to just get a bunch of Keenan Allen, but he's got to be a massive value here. Like I saw something that he hasn't played in the preseason since 2018, and I mean, people are like really dissecting his routes in the preseason. He wasn't trying. Like, okay, he did go at 6'12". From what I could tell, like, why would he even be trying? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of. But I can see taking a Dunze, I guess, at this point and just saying he's going to be a breakout superstar. So we are back up. JSN. Do you like Reed over JSN? I guess Reed goes quite a bit higher, right?
They're going in the similar range right now. Actually, just 2 picks apart. So that's where I would lean with it. I mean, if you're not sold on Reed, which I certainly understand, this is just a really cool JSN pick for me.
Oh, really? You would prefer it to be Reed?
No. I'm saying I would prefer probably JSN.
Okay, that's who it would be it's the last receiver before the big tier break on my board, right? And I have him as a target, and it's like and Reed comes off in an instant after the JSN pick. So certainly was a good pick here as well. But for me, because I have Reed down a little bit, I can understand having him higher. He's a year 2 stud. Maybe I should have him before that big tier break. Maybe that's a mistake in my ranking process. That's why I was very open to talking through that with you, because I can totally see why a listener might be like, well, how do you have a big tier break between Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jaden Reed? They're like very similar plays. And Reed was better.
He was a lot better. And
yeah,
he was incredibly impressive, I think, both before and after the catch. You and I talk about that a lot as being things that we're looking for, sort of the element that was so important for us with Stephon Diggs. One of the things in terms of writing about him for this year was when I went back and worked through it, both in our stats and some of the things powered by SIS, the memories that I had of it and things that I say on the show were very concrete in the data that Diggs has dominated at all levels of the defense, and that gives you so many things that the offensive coordinator can do, the QB can do. But even if the coaching staff makes some questionable decisions, which we do run into with our players from time to time, a player who is that good and that flexible is going to come out of it with at least some solid numbers because they're so good at everything. They're not going to get put into a role that doesn't fit them because they do everything well. Jaden Reed, I don't think we can talk about at that level yet, but his ability, and this was certainly the case of a lot of the Packers receivers, in part because of the beautiful design from Matt LaFleur, but he's running wide open, and then Jordan Love, like he's playing catch in the backyard, gets it to him. And then unlike a lot of their other guys, and certainly unlike Romeo Doubs, which was just very disappointing because we've liked Doubs as well, his ability once he had the ball was, it just jumped off of the TV screen. And for anybody who didn't have him in week 17 and was in position to win a tournament, I mean, you were tearing your hair out. Like, he's not being covered at all, right? What is possibly happening here? The defense, he seemed to be invisible. So even with the rest of the target competition, I think that Jaden Reed ends up absolutely annihilating this ADP. One of the things that was interesting, and you want to be a little bit conservative in terms of how you suggest that it is going to carry over to the next season, but the gaps were so monstrous. And the gaps in terms of what I'm talking about here, when you looked at both the broken tackles and the forced missed tackles, so these two combined elements of the evaded tackles for Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, they were stars. Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson didn't do anything. Now, Watson is so explosive vertically that you would expect him to get over the top of the defense and score some long touchdowns. Certainly in best ball, I think that he's going to end up as a dynamic pick. I just think this Green Bay Packers team is going to score so many points. You know, I'm a little bit overweight on Jordan Love at QB. I think that Watson could be frustrating for redraft managers where he has a big week. You put him in, he scores like Gabe Davis, you take him back out. He has a big week. And, 4 or 5 weeks into that rotation, you just kind of wish you'd never heard his name. Now, maybe that won't happen. Maybe he'll just be a superstar. I think that's possible too. But no, I would be looking at Reed as the guy. Yeah, so Reed is the guy who could be the star, just all-around star, easy start every week. And then Wicks is kind of the guy where, adjusted for price, you look at him and you're like, if anything happens to those other guys, he's going to go in there and also really score.
He's the one to me that actually, because of the way that Reed's used, and I guess, everything you're saying about how open Reed was, all those things, it's very much there on the film, but just the way that they were using him late, the routes being way down in the playoff game. I know he was a little bit banged up, but he was very odd.
He was pretty hurt, but.
So you think that was mostly all just that was interesting? Because he was supposed to be healthy going into the postseason, and then they didn't really seem to use him very much in either of the postseason games, if I recall correctly. Or
like, did you see us play the Dallas Cowboys? They might as well not have been on the field.
Right. They didn't really necessarily need him in that game, but even in the Niners game, I'm pretty sure he was coming off in a lot of spots. Yeah, he played 61% of the snaps. He was very rotational. It's weird that Doubs is the one that always winds up with so many snaps. And a lot of people, a lot of fantasy analysts have taken to saying a very specific point that Doubs is going to run the most routes on this team. I just saw another tweet today that Love and Doubs connected for 2 long passes in practice today. That connection is very real, et cetera, et cetera. Doubs does.
Well, it's not just fantasy managers. The beat reporters are saying he's gotten the most targets in camp.
Right. That's who I was talking about. Yeah, it was a beat reporter was mentioning that. It's been a pretty steady drum beat around Doubs, and he's the one that they seem to play. Like when I'm looking at the San Francisco game, he was at 81%. Reed was at 61%. This is snaps because it's the easy thing to look up for me right now. Watson was at 55%. Wicks was at 40%. And it's like, Reed's at this 60% level. His routes would have been higher because he's coming on in passing situations, 3 receiver sets. It's like Wicks and Watson were splitting. It's just why? Why is Doubs not coming off? So anyway, the rotations are, Matt LaFleur has famously said that trying to name a number 1 wide receiver, making puke or what have you. For me, with the Wicks play, it's what you were saying, where like there's a lot of contingency-based scenarios, there's an anti-fragile element to it, where like, yeah, he might not run a lot of routes early, but the skill set, as you were describing, is so high that if he does get an opportunity to run a lot of routes, you would expect him to be a superstar, essentially, right? Like there's not a lot of like middle. There's obviously middle ground, but he's a fun play in that regard. That there's a lot of ways that you can see if there's an injury, as you sort of referenced, or even if he just breaks out in such a way that he has to be the guy that's running 80% of the routes instead of Doubs. That could become very apparent in season. The Reed stuff, I can see how you're thinking of it very similarly, and I think that makes sense. I guess I just worry that the routes won't be consistent enough, which would be, it would just be frustrating. It would be unnecessarily frustrating. So we are almost back up. Somebody who has slid a little bit, Shawn. And I'm sure you're not super into it, but on a team where we didn't get Rice or Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown is actually sitting here in the 8th round. Is that right?
Yeah, he's still there. The one I'm desperately hoping will fall is Chase Brown.
Yes.
He is much more expensive than this. I don't have any problem taking CJ Stroud without the receivers.
Yeah, I don't know why he has slid so much. Chase Brown is several spots up from the other running backs for me. Stroud did go unstacked to somebody else. We are one pick away. Jaylen Warren goes. Chase Brown makes it to us. All in. I'm very much with you. It's not. I would not have suggested Hollywood over him. The other pick here is now Jaden Daniels is my top quarterback with Stroud off the board. We could consider him at 903 unstacked as well. What do you think about him right now?
Well, the questions around that are Joe Burrow, given that the 3-week run with Higgins
and Chase Brown
might work together there.
Yeah.
With Jordan Love, you may end up with Dontavian Wicks, and that's one again where we just discussed how it could be very split. I don't think you necessarily have to have his receivers. He does go one pick after us.
He goes on the turn here.
The thing that it comes back to for me here, Ben, is that it's a little bit like the Kyle Pitts thing, where if we select Joe Burrow, we know like the first month of the season, the Bengals will go out there and act like they haven't practiced or game planned or anything. The Bengals get a lot of credit for a team that looks poorly coached a huge chunk of the time. And then Hollywood Brown goes right there. Hollywood Brown and Keon Coleman. I just have Jaden Daniels so much higher than Joe Burrow that it's tough for me to take Burrow even with Higgins.
Right. That's the tricky thing. I have a big tier break between them myself. Yeah, I don't know how to approach this. I think both of those QBs are very much in play here at 903. We're also about to get we have 4 receivers, and we're trying to play Wicks later, but we could take Addison here, who you really like. Now that Hollywood and Keon Coleman go, it's like, how far do you really want to push Addison? DeAndre Hopkins is still there. I think that's probably one of the quarterbacks. Where are you leaning?
Well, Jameson Williams does. Oh, is he one you considered at all?
Yeah. He's actually right there behind Addison for me. I was going to say him. I don't think I did, but I would be very open to him. He's had apparently a great camp, and we don't. Yeah, so we'll take him there. I actually really like that. I was going to say him along with Addison. I have him one slot behind Addison. They were my top 2 available receivers. I have actually Hopkins a little small tier behind that. But yeah, no, I'm very into that play on this build as well as our wide receiver 5. I've been trying to get more of him. I made it intentional. He's a little bit more affordable, not a ton more affordable, but a little bit more affordable here than like Underdog. He's always just been a little bit pricier than where I've wanted to get to him. So I haven't gotten a lot of him in best ball. So I like having some exposure to that play in this format. It seems like he's having a great camp, right?
Yeah, and I would love for it to be a situation where he plays so well that he's a clear-cut start in Week 17 when they're going up against the 49ers. He also has a Week 16 game against the Bears, where this would be another interesting thing to kind of plan through and talk through as we kind of work back to front a little bit. Because Caleb Williams is very clearly like a fallback QB option if we don't get the 2 people we mentioned, who frankly are probably not going to come back, right?
Yeah.
So you would then have 2 of the 3 people across that 3-week race. And again, this is just sort of a minor little piece of it. But with the 49ers, we have both Kupp and Williams now, which are 2 of the different weeks there. And if we're thinking about later QBs like Purdy and Stafford and thinking about, how you might play different paths through and what games we might want to shoot out, I think that having Jameson Williams is kind of fun, in addition to just the fact that, he's a Lion. He's an early pick. He's super fast. If he blew up and the gap between Amon-Ra and Williams it's not going to close by any stretch, but if it's closer than what ADP indicates substantially, I would be really sad that we didn't make that play.
For sure. The Chase drafter does take Burrow here in the 9th. Hopkins went a little while after our Jameson Williams pick.
The other little note is that I do think that Addison could come back. And if he does, then you end up potentially building out this team that's really strong, because we have Robinson and Chase Brown. We love that running back start, even though, I mean, Chase Brown might not be the RB2 we need, but it's certainly exciting. We've got the 2 elite tight ends. To be able to do that and still end up with a really deep wide receiver position would be exactly what we want to come out of the draft with, where we can have some misses, we can have some injuries, we can have a lot of bye week coverage. We want to really put the hammer down on the rest of the league during the bye weeks. Given the fact that the elite quarterbacks are so cheap, or that the elite quarterback tier for me stretches so deep into the draft, it would be disappointing to not come out of the draft with a quarterback that you think can score a lot of points. But if that meant that we had the other 3 positions covered better than would have really ever been possible in the past, that would be a nice offset.
So we're off to a fast start. We have not gotten all of the options that we, were sort of foreseeing out of the 103. We mentioned, being very intrigued by Dalton Kincaid, maybe in the second round. We wound up with Cooper Kupp. We didn't necessarily love the Debo thing when we end up getting Kittle in the 4th. Didn't get either of the Kansas City receivers, which is, just feels wrong at this point. One of the reasons to be doing these mains, with a few weeks left, feels like to get exposure to some of those values that are going to close over the final weeks when there's a ton, in that final week. But what we have here after 9 is Bijan Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Debo Samuel, George Kittle, T. Higgins, Brock Bowers, JSN as our 4th. Chase Brown as our RB2. We get Jameson Williams as our wide receiver 5. It's still a very fun team. It's not like this is a bad team. It's not like we're in a situation that we can't get out of. But
I was just saying this is like the better than the best possible team, and then you went with this isn't a bad team.
I was messing with my rankings during that spiel, so I did the thing where I just started down a different path and hoped it didn't overlap with the thing that you had said, because I wasn't paying very good attention. I'm looking at our recording. I'm like, all right, this is probably where we're going to split up the shows. Like, all right, I'll do a little recap and it won't overlap with Shawn was making a point about QBs. Is where he started. I was listening intently through like the Caleb Williams talk. So yeah, you think this is the best team we could have drafted? Woo! I think we're salvaging things here, Shawn. No, it's been a fun start to this draft. It'll be great to see the way it goes from here on out. I'm very into, you and I had chatted briefly about there's other pathways with Dak. I don't know that he'd be my preferred. You mentioned Caleb Williams. He's on the top of my board right now. I think Trevor Lawrence is a really intriguing unstacked quarterback from the perspective of, I do think that's another offense that's going to be, we're talking about the Packers wide receivers being this way a little bit, but like sort of a better and best ball thing where like I got asked why I'm not targeting in my rankings any of the Jaguars guys when I have Trevor Lawrence listed as a target. And I was like, just at their different price points and everything, I just don't love any of them necessarily, but I do like sort of all of them. I even think Gabe Davis is probably just like being overlooked in the late, like in the double-digit rounds. Like he just doesn't matter anymore, but people aren't like, he's an efficient player after the target. He plays the ball well. He does good things on football fields. People just have decided that he's terrible. He can't play anymore. There are certainly, I've been a little bit out on Brian Thomas, but he's the one that I end up getting the most of because he's really gotten too cheap, even as a guy who's not really on his prospect profile. But Christian Kirk, a little bit banged up this August and had gotten so pricey that he's tricky at times. And then, Evan Ingram in this one went ahead of George Kittle in the tight end premium formats because of how many balls he caught last year. I think those guys are going to be great underneath, catch a lot of passes, be like, small miss types. They're not going to be massive misses at their ADPs. I don't know that they're going to be big hit types either, though. I think they're going to be small miss, small hit probably. Anyway, I think you capture this potential upside of this passing game that's very fascinating through a Lawrence play, which is also an argument for Caleb. And I have Caleb as the fallback on Jaden Daniels. You miss Jaden Daniels, you go get Caleb. Then if you miss Caleb, then you go get T-Law, right? Then you start thinking about Trevor Lawrence. I'm open to a lot of different things here, Shawn.
Is one of those things stashing Nick Chubb?
I mean, he's a handful of running backs down my list. It could be. Are you that optimistic on him?
Well, I think for winning the whole contest, he's a pretty fun play.
We take him here. Both the guys at the turn have a quarterback already. We hope Caleb swings back around, kind of a move.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be able to get either Caleb or Dak Prescott.
All right, let's take Nick Chubb. I have ahead of Nick Chubb among the running backs who have not gone yet. I have Blake Corum, who has not gone yet. Or did he go a long time ago and I missed it?
He has not gone.
Blake Corum hasn't gone. Charbonnet, Jalen Wright, Bucky Irving, and I moved Kamani Vidal way back up after his performance, Shawn, because I think we didn't really need to see a whole lot in August. We just needed to know that he was not, completely out of the equation. And what we did see was that he's actually maybe a pretty good runner. He was a really intriguing runner in that preseason week 2 game. And that's such an anti-fragile spot where there's a lot of fragility above him. There's a lot of ways that things could open up for him that I think you got to get back in on Vidal in a big way quickly.
He's an interesting one, and he does factor into the 0 RB countdown. I'm not going to say if it's directly or not, but in kind of working through it, there are some other very intriguing running backs who could get cut, and they're intriguing in part because if they got cut, then you would expect them to potentially land with the Cowboys and the Chargers. Vidal is in the situation where if he gets cut off of one of the teams that needs a running back, then you have an issue with it. I don't think that
he's
was
not getting
happen.
Cut. I think there was the one report that he was left off the 53 man by I think it was Daniel Popper from The Athletic, and he acknowledged that is largely because he didn't know a lot from Harbaugh, and then he's since put him back on the 53. We're back up. Do you want to go, Caleb? What do you think here?
Well, part of me thinks that if you have a play, we could keep pushing it, because after the first 10 QBs go, sometimes there are some real falls. I mean, I think that Caleb Williams is probably the pick here, but if you have a guy that you want, we should grab him instead.
I don't really. I mean, it would be Wicks probably. I do have him as the last before another big tier break in my receivers. Last time I took Wicks on a stream with ship chasing, or I said that we should take him, I got some feedback that we took him like a round above his previous high. So I'm assuming that he goes a lot later than this. I don't know. Like, apparently I'm the only one that's thinks that he should go in the 11th round. I think it's probably Caleb here, just because there's a lot of Chicago receivers and a pretty strong likelihood that one of them might take him. All these other teams do have one quarterback, but he looked incredible in the preseason. In both games, looked poised, looked good, rushed for a TD, which he did a ton of in college, massive rushing TD numbers. He looks like a guy who's got really good weapons. He's going to throw for a lot of volume, and he's also going to be able to use his mobility well.
So you liked him in preseason week 2?
He had some. I actually wrote up in the preseason. I mean, fair. I actually wrote up in the preseason week 2 piece that just posted. You probably haven't had a chance to look at it. You mentioned this earlier in the show. You have been working on the 0 RB countdown all day. I wrote, he did play well overall. I'm still very into him. I started that they went 3 and out on three straight drives. But when I'm clarifying, I didn't feel the need to push him higher in the ranks, which my perception catching some of the social media commentary was maybe I'd need to because he was lights out. Because there was a lot of excitement about the one throw when he was moving left and flipped his hips and hit a doomsday down the field. I thought there was obviously 3 and out in the first 3 drives wasn't great. And I had seen I had not seen it live. And so I had seen the reactions from other people who you can sometimes think from social are watching the whole game, but they're probably just reacting to one highlight as well. And so when I went back and watched it, what I wrote was my response in watching it myself was a little bit different. That I emphasized at first that they went 3 and out on the first 3 drives and they had some issues as well. But I did think there was some other stuff.
But are you getting some Arthur Smith vibes from Shane Waldron?
No. I wasn't worried about it, especially because they're letting him play. So he had the rushing TD in the first. No, it was in the second preseason game, which was an extended play. He had the extended play in the second preseason game where he hit Odunze with an absolute rifle in the back corner of the end zone, and Odunze had his feet on the. So Wicks does go 3 picks after us.
Yeah, I was going to mention we were kind of talking about other stuff, but this was the range we would have wanted to take him.
We would have wanted to take him. Yeah. I got a lot of static that I was suggesting him too high. I don't know where we took him in the draft. Maybe it was early 10th because we were in the back of the board. I thought it was at the 11, 12. I can't remember. It's like I don't see that as being high at all. Well, that's a bummer that he didn't have a shot to really come back and he went right after us. So I'm kind of blabbling since you asked that because I do think he had a good preseason overall. He made plays. He looked comfortable. I wasn't thrilled by like all of it. I did think Odunze looked really good. And I think you're maybe lower on Odunze overall and maybe some more bust risk than I think he has. I think he's just going to be fantastic. The Keenan stuff where he's not really even playing yet. I don't know. I still think this offense is going to be really good once they're actually like trying. Once Keenan Allen's trying, because I just think he's probably just not even putting in a whole lot of effort in the preseason because he's 32 years old. Why is he even playing in the preseason kind of thing? And the way that Caleb made some of the plays, some of it wasn't great, but some of it looked, I don't know, pretty exceptional to me. When they get in these situations, and even if they trail, even if Waldron's offense isn't great, he's going to have to freestyle at times. He's going to have receivers that are going to be good enough to do it with him. I don't know.
The receivers are going to be fantastic. I'm just trying to work through what I think the actual range of outcomes is for him, especially as a rookie and especially when we passed on Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels. I do think even with how fantastic his profile is for fantasy and how good his weapons are, that he probably can't hang with most of the rest of the QBs in this group. And by that, I just mean everybody drafted ahead. We've got the cheapest price of anybody who's been picked yet at the QB position. I guess I do think he could easily hang with Joe Burrow, which was one of the reasons why we did end up passing him, even though he made perfect sense for our team. I think he could hang with Anthony Richardson. And I guess I think he could hang with Kyler Murray.
Caleb.
Yes.
And I definitely think he can hang with Daniels. What would you say about what Daniels did in the offense? So you were talking about some of the Waldron stuff, being a little concerned about the offense or alluding to it. I'm a little concerned about Kingsbury just bringing back the horizontal rate. It was all RPOs and short, quick passes in preseason week 2. And Daniels looked good operating it. But, I mean, you can't do that for a full season. We saw that not work with the Cardinals early in Kyler's career.
No, I think that's a good point. Daniels is even much better set up from that just perfect fantasy football profile. And yet there's quite a bit of floor. And by that, I mean sort of the opposite. There's quite a bit of risk that you have that you do have some bad weeks. Right. So yeah, it'll just be interesting to see. I keep going back to Jordan Love, to me, has the perfect mix of attributes, but again, maybe not the absolute full season ceiling. I'm starting to wish CJ Stroud had made it to us at the 8-10. I don't know.
Yeah,
I love this team. I love this team.
As you're talking, you always love every team. This is like the most negative you've ever been about a team. As we're talking through, I love this team, but I'm kind of questioning one pick. As we're talking through this, we went Jamison Williams over Burrow when we have T. Higgins, and then where we took Caleb, you're telling me was the spot to take Dontavian Wicks, and so Burrow Dontavian Wicks is a 2v2 versus Jamison Williams and Caleb Williams, and I more or less have Wicks and Jamison Williams in the same tier. So having Burrow stacked 2 rounds higher with the pass rate certainty being a lot higher. I mean, one of those teams paid a running back a ton of money. That's the Bears, and already had good running backs on their team. The other one had no running backs on their team and still didn't pay anyone any money. They brought in Zach Moss very cheaply and are turning over their backfield to him and their 5th-round rookie from the year prior that they gave 50 touches to. They told you they're going to throw the ball a ton, the Bengals. That's just sort of the point that I'm driving home there. Bucky Irving goes here.
You talk about
12.
Horizontal raid. I mean, the Bengals have decided that they want to use Jamar Chase as a screen guy.
Yeah, he's got like a 9.8 odd for the last couple of years. You're kind of all over the map right now. You said you were going to be a little loopy after writing all day today. You were just saying
I was just saying that I didn't want Joe Burrow, and then you went back.
Okay.
And now you're making the Joe Burrow case.
Well, yeah, the 2v2s.
We've got a real shot at getting Dak Prescott on this team as well.
Still, all the way back here. It would be nice to pair Caleb with somebody. Dak does go right after you say that. Had to go and jinx it. A couple like notable picks. Tyler Conklin goes at the 11-12. Ben Sinnott goes at the 12-02. Highest I've seen him go. Isaiah Likely went at the 11-01.
Oh no, not to the Jaden Daniels team. Sorry.
No, yeah, not.
I'm just giving out false information is all.
The Daniels team took Conklin. The Ezekiel Elliott drafter took Ben Sinnott, so he's all over the map. He also took Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Khalil Shakir. I would have said he had a certain type, but then he went really high up for Ben Sinnott. So I'm intrigued by what he was thinking there. Isaiah Likely went 11-01. He's been getting a lot of big-time hype in camp. I moved him up my board a little bit. It sounds like they're going to probably play both tight ends together a little bit, but I have a hard time seeing where the volume is going to be there for him personally. I'm not trying to criticize too many other people, but some of these tight ends in this range are a worthwhile note for why, people want to maybe question why we take George Kittle at 4.10 and Brock Bowers at 6.10. Well, in tight end premium, this is what happens in the 11th and 12th round, where Dak Prescott is still on the board, where, the running backs in the range since we last picked were a lot of those intriguing 0 RB, often rookie types. Blake Corum, Zach Charbonnet, Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, Zeke went in there, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, and Bucky Irving. I would want to be taking any of them over having, feeling like I needed to take a tight end in that range and those tight ends that went. But those were intriguing picks because like Luke Musgrave's still there. I would take Musgrave over those guys. There's some other names.
Yeah, I just don't understand really what's happening with that.
Yeah, it's been a surprise in this room for sure. So we are back
ADP
up.
is in 11, and the rest of those guys' ADPs are lower. So people are getting who they want, which we strongly recommend.
For sure. So at this point, Sean, since I shoved Kamani Vidal way up as far as I could get him, he is my top running back, and then Marshawn Lloyd, who I know you really like. It does start to thin out fairly quick. Both of the Broncos backups are in this range. McLaughlin and Estime, I like both of them. Braylon Allen, I think, is in contention. We could go like a Jerry Jeudy if you want to get another receiver here. We could get a Musgrave. We could get another QB2. I think there's a lot of structural things we can do here.
Yeah, I think for me this is Jeudy or McLaughlin. Are those either one of those guys the pick or acceptable?
Yeah, they're both fine. I think let's take Jeudy. We only have 5 receivers. Let's see. There's a few other running backs we can pass around the turn. Jeudy feels like a target here in a way that the rest of the receivers behind here maybe won't be. McLaughlin comes off really quick right after it. This room has been listening in on our conversations a little bit here, Sean. Musgrave goes at the turn.
Ugh.
Yeah, I really liked the
Braylon
McLaughlin. Braylon Allen went as well. I really liked the McLaughlin usage. You're not with me on the Kamani Vidal, no matter what. After what we saw,
I do like that pick, and he's someone that we've liked, that we've drafted quite a bit. ADP suggests he won't come back, which I would feel more comfortable with him in round 14. However, there were 4 really good picks right in a row, in part because the rest of the round had maybe not been great. And so you get Judy, McLaughlin, Musgrave, and Allen all going boom, 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 boom. With those guys gone, I would be back to Lloyd or Vidal.
Yeah, those are all strong picks. I think Lloyd's a good pick too. I want to bet against Gus and J.K. Dobbins. You could tell from my side where I was going with that. So you clicked Vidal before I even said it. I mean, look, like as I wrote it up and as I wrote up the preseason thing, and I encourage Signals subscribers to read that specifically if you don't get a chance to read the whole thing. But I got to writing it up, and I got more and more encouraged. He looked good on film. People talked about how he was still behind Jarrett Patterson. Patterson's been doing well in camp, and he's the veteran, and he's a guy that you liked as a Vidal type, a day 3 guy once upon a time. He started the game, but he only played 3 snaps, and then Vidal came on, and they started giving the ball to Vidal. They gave him 11 carries, 3 targets. Patterson caught 5 balls in this game, actually, but only a couple carries. It was like, we want to get Kamani Vidal some work. They got him some work with the first team. They got him some more work later in the game. He missed a first preseason game. I thought that was all very natural for what you would want to do if you really liked the guy. They've talked about loving him. Greg Roman talked about him back in May and June about really liking the skills. That's why I was taking a lot of him then. We know that the peripherals were really good, and he showed that. He got tight into space and big, hard, physical runner. You know who he reminded me of as I was writing this, Shawn, is he reminded me so much of Frank Gore, which was Harbaugh and Roman's guy for the 49ers, that ability to get small and tight in space, but also he's big, he's compact, and navigating these, between the tackles, lanes up the middle and shooting out the other side for a 12-yard gain and stumbling, through contact for the final 6 of those yards, getting through linebackers with little movements in space. I mean, this is a very film-based take here, but we also know that he was a really good pass blocker in college. He was second in the NCAA in missed tackles force, and a lot of these very favorable stats. The other thing that happened as I was watching through is I thought at one snap he looked way slower, and I was like, oh, man, that wasn't a good rep. And then I realized it was Isaiah Spiller. And I was like, okay, so this isn't just my bias. I literally thought it was Kamani Vidal because I could tell he was slower. I was like, that's weird. And then I realized it was Isaiah Spiller who had come in. And Vidal did play ahead of Spiller, which is why Daniel Popper, he referenced that he had Spiller making his team in last week's 53-man over at the Athletic. This week he has Vidal back in there. He does have Patterson also making it, them keeping 4 running backs. I don't think Patterson is the upside play, anti-fragile play against Dobbins and Edwards. And Dobbins might be great this year, but we're talking about coming off an Achilles. We're talking about Gus Edwards already saw all of his peripherals decline last year and the efficiency go when he still had Lamar in the offense. By week 5, the Kamani Vidal I saw this weekend, is he not going to very clearly be the most efficient runner? I mean, and what if he just gets work in week 1? What if he gets 8 carries in week 1? As a secondary change of pace guy, I'll be doing backflips in a 13th round price.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable if we had gotten still the previous discount.
Yeah.
But Michael Dubner had a fantastic article out today, and it was best ball oriented, but the same takeaways completely are true for redraft, which is the these veteran running backs score the worst for you at the key moments, and the rookies score the best. Now, I've simplified it. He had it broken down by round cohort, had it broken down by a variety of other things in terms of the back himself, a ton of good visuals to help you sort of think through how that flip happens. Absolutely fantastic piece. If you're a subscriber, make sure you get over there and check that out. The takeaway is that exactly what you're saying is the reason you have to lean into a pick like that. And again, and people are like, oh, there are certain structural things that make zero RB work now. And you're like, no, the reason it works is that you want to have the players who score the most points at the most important time of the season.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the bet, is just the late season element of it. But for me, I mean, I'm like, what I saw this weekend to me made him exactly the bet that I wanted him to be, which was that he's going to be an anti-fragile bet against Edwards and Dobbins. And I think he's going to be on the roster. And I think he was good enough that Harbaugh and Roman are going to like him. I'm very willing to believe that they're going to see what I saw, what the announcers were seeing. Like, again, this is not just a bias thing. It's what that's why I shared the Isaiah Spiller anecdote, because I think that is relevant. Like, it's not just that I was seeing something I wanted to see. The announcers are talking about how he's this lightning bolt of electricity and all this stuff, or whatever they were talking about. They're getting so excited every snap. Oh, he's really putting on a show here. I mean, it's very apparent, and a lot of the highlights have made the rounds, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen it as well. He looked good, and I mean, the bet was that he would be this underrated day 3 find from a smaller school, had strong collegiate peripherals, and could just be the guy in a backfield that, I mean, you earlier referenced they could add somebody as well, which could become a problem. But they've talked him up, again, as I mentioned, since minicamp, since May, that they really like him. And seeing him get, again, 11 carries and 3 targets in a preseason game. Now, he missed preseason week 1, but they were obviously like, we want to get some film on him, and then look that good. He goes for 49 rushing yards on those 11 carries, catches 2 of the passes. I mean, and the whole time looking like a Harbaugh and Greg Roman runner. I mean, like I said, he's a bet that it's not a guaranteed to work situation, but he's the bet that I wanted him to be. Like you just talked about, either like it could hit early, or it's the anti-fragile bet for later in the year. But I still think it has a shot.
I think one of the things you have to ask yourself too, when you're thinking through what you want to pay for these guys, is, are Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins better than Ezekiel Elliott and Royce Freeman? Or are they better than Ezekiel Elliott and Miles Sanders? Because Vidal is more of a bet that the team has made and has more of a profile or a resume in and of himself than someone like Rico Dowdle, where the thesis is mostly that the other guys can't play. And that thesis is correct. But it relies on other people, and it relies on the idea that the Cowboys are going to be good enough offensively for it to matter. Whereas I guess I'm much more confident that the Chargers offense environmentally for the running game will be better than the Dallas Cowboys version.
Right. I mean, that's the big part of this, is like, we know the Chargers are going to run the football. Like, this is a fundamental thing that they're going to do, and they're going to block it up and scheme it up. Greg Roman has done that, right? He made Gus Edwards a long time ago. When Gus Edwards was a UDFA, very straight line runner, and has had a long, very successful career. You look at Kamani Vidal and you're like, this guy's better than Gus Edwards. I mean, Gus Edwards is a big physical back, and he's a fun runner. I mean, I've only seen Kamani Vidal run, 11, some college tape and 11 preseason games. So saying he's better than Gus Edwards is probably a little bit exuberant. But,
well, I mean, he's got a better athletic profile than Mark Ingram, who is somebody else who has succeeded in the Roman offense. And with someone who is as good, and by good, like slightly above average for a really long time. I mean, there's something to be said for that. Mark Ingram, as you obviously know, as the person who has worked through the research, but I mean, he's basically the one guy who has hit a couple of times out of the dead zone. And there's a reason that he's in the dead zone. And then, there's a reason he did hit, which is that he ended up being able to be consistent as an older, not that athletic back. And so it would be
that's a fun comp. That's a fun comp for Vidal for sure. I mean, that's another one that like
he's got to gain thousands and thousands of yards at the NFL level to be similar, but there are similarities.
Yeah, as far as play style and all of that, when I mentioned Frank Gore, I mean obviously Frank Gore and Mark Ingram are not wildly different players. It's you can understand the type of player, but there's some size, there's some physicality. These are guys that can play on 3 downs too, and I think you see that from Vidal. Like he has skills, he has ball skills. The reasons that he recorded so many missed tackles forced at the college level show up. Like he clearly has a feel for football. I don't know. I'm into him again. I'm very, very back into him. I think, there was a real reason to be concerned after he didn't play in the first preseason game and you had beat reporters leaving him out their 53-man rosters. But I think after that preseason week 2 game, you shoot him back up. I mean, this is a range of running back where like anyone can go anywhere, basically, right? Like you just shoot him back. Like if you're as excited as I am, you're willing to say, look, like the path is there. The bet is what it is. Like it is what it was advertised to be. He's got the skill set to take. I mean, if Dobbins is great, right? Like that's one of the outcomes here too. The Dobbins is actually like an Achilles survival story that just goes, amazing. I don't think there's a real strong Gus Edwards one. Audric Estime goes 1 pick ahead of us there, Sean. He was a guy that I was going to mention as a slider. We are back up.
So there does happen to be a quarterback who has 2 of our receiving weapons who's like 3 rounds below ADP. I still kind of don't want to take him, but it seems like we have to.
I was going to pivot to Brock Purdy. He's the last for me before a big tier break. Add some stability behind Caleb. We don't have Caleb stacked. We do have Debo and Kittle both on this roster. We do take Purdy there. The question now coming back is where are you at coming back here? What do you like?
Well, I have some passion project players in Kendre Miller and Will Shipley.
Yes. Kendre Miller was one I was going to float to you. He's the next running back on my board now with Estime off. I mean, I just did a whole Vidal thing. You might as well do a whole Kendre. I think those are the 2 guys that I had huge bags of in Underdog in like the 15th round. And then they both were 20th round or 18th rounder, probably higher than the 15th. And then they both became 18th rounders pretty quick. It was not great. I mean, Tank Bigsby just went off, right? Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason have both gone off. Khalil Herbert is off. Tyrone Tracy went off last round. Anyone else you can imagine? Antonio Gibson, Chuba Hubbard, all these guys are gone. Marshawn Lloyd went. We're very much in Kendre Miller territory as far as
we are. And I think that in best ball, you would need to be careful here. Yeah. I mentioned Michael Dubner's fantastic peak. Jake Bowes has a piece that I think anybody who's drafting a lot of best ball needs to read. It focuses on both the bye week element and the 0% element, which is how he's conceptualizing this element of taking zeros, which we know you don't want to do, but it's a question of, well, how do you draft someone good enough to not do that? But when you're looking at Kendre Miller and the question is like, is he going to ever play football again? Which we know he will, but you don't want to add holes to your team. Ben, in the 16th round, I should say the 15th round of redraft, where you can wait for the guy to get healthy, as soon as Kendre Miller plays a few snaps in practice and looks good, then he jumps 5 rounds because he basically has to. We don't have to worry about the time frame in redraft. I mean, not worry about it at all. It's got to happen sometime, but there are very different considerations.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, let's take him. Let's keep talking about him. I'm curious for like the bull case that you could make here after I did the whole Vidal. What is the Kendre Miller bet at this point? One thing I'll note about the preseason week 1 usage, just to start you off, is I was encouraged by how they used Taysom Hill, which people were talking about. They used Taysom Hill in single back at tailback on the first drive as the number 2 back. because Kamara was also out. But one of the things that I took from that was that they didn't feel like there were some other depth backs that they were ready to pull up and play along with Jamal Williams with the first team on the first drive behind Derek Carr. Instead, they wanted to get Taysom Hill some of this creative usage, which might mean that Kendre Miller's role is still available in that sort of spot. Or just that if he gets back and gets practicing, like you said, like he doesn't have a Jarrett Patterson like Kamani Vidal does, or it doesn't seem to. Jordan Mims was the guy that eventually started rotating in on the second drive. Taysom Hill's there, but Taysom Hill's never going to be like a 20 carry threat. So if Kamara and Jamal Williams, who, as far as the Kendre Miller bet's concerned, have both, they're the fragile profiles that the anti-fragile element of Kendre Miller's bet are relying on. Both those guys have had their peripherals fall off. If they're both bad, it's not going to be Taysom Hill for 20 carries. It doesn't seem like it's going to be Jordan Mims because they're not pushing to get him work in this spot. But what is it about the Kendre Miller bet that really intrigues you?
Well, the first thing is that they picked him ahead of Tyjae Spears and Devon Achane. They are not going to cut him. But the other part would be that this is the best possible season to be in a situation where you're a talented back who would get cut, because then you would just go be the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys, which might simply be better. There's no scenario in which him being hurt right now walls him off from being what Rashad Penny was a couple of years ago after he was cut midseason by everybody because of what was happening at that point. But when you look at Miller, the reason they drafted him there was that his collegiate peripherals with TCU, as he was one of the drivers to get them to the national championship game, their peripherals were very, very good. And that's as a back who had limited work because he had been previously sharing with Zach Evans, but a young player. We think about him and some of the other, you think about like a Braylon Allen. I mean, these guys are years and years younger than players like Ray Davis and someone we like in Tyrone Tracy. It's not that Davis and Tracy should be, thrown out of consideration because they're older, but you do want to understand when and how these guys did what they did to make a team interested in them in the first place. And then when he got a chance to actually play last year, he looked fantastic. The Saints think that he's going to be their future starting running back. One of the reasons I think they're so angry is that having him miss all this time reduces some of their leverage with Alvin Kamara. But the other thing is that Kamara's peripherals have absolutely cratered, and he's actually more in that group with like a Gus Edwards and Ezekiel Elliott than it feels like, because unlike those guys, he scored a ton of fantasy points last year. But similar to where Austin Eckler was right before everything just fell off the cliff. I mean, there was a stretch last year when Austin Eckler scored a ton of fantasy points, and now he is basically irrelevant. Right.
And
that
John,
is the situation.
Are so bad that I had him ranked Alvin Kamara like 40 spots too low. You had to, even as somebody who knows his peripherals are horrible, tell me that I needed to move him up like 20 spots just to have any credibility. So like that was me not paying attention to the market and just paying attention to the peripherals, but being like, this is a back who's done. Like you got to just move him all the way out of here.
And so we work through those different elements, and you have a chance to be embarrassed because you continue to take someone like Kendre Miller during this stretch that looks bad, but embarrassment at the 1503 doesn't make any difference. If he goes back and has a couple of practices, if he has a decent stretch in week 1, then you're off to the races and you're really glad that you got this discount.
Yeah.
Because you can just churn him if you're wrong.
Right. It makes a ton of sense in manage to make these plays. That's and your notes about like if he gets cut, there's still outs. Like that's something that I was thinking as it related to Vidal as well. When he got left off the 53 and everyone panicked and dropped him all the way to the end. It's like, well, I mean, he was drafted in the 6th round. Like there's no saying that another team might not have drafted him if he had continued to fall. Maybe he's completely,
he was the guy the Dallas Cowboys were going to draft in round 7 and make their starter.
I basically said that on Ship Chasing last week, and then Pat was like, I think Pat's response was he'd welcome the Vidal challenge to Rico Dowdle, who is his boy. That would be a positive for Dowdle. After seeing Vidal, and preseason week 2. I mean, I want him to get cut. I want him to go to Dallas. I think he would take over that backfield. Yeah.
Well, I like Rico Dowdle, and I was going to pull this up here.
Kendre Miller, I can't be as excited about because we haven't seen it. He's never done anything. And does he exist, Sean? He made that one catch, like a diving catch on like a wheel route that was sick. That's it. That's the only time I've ever seen him play football. I've never seen anything else.
He had
box score says
an entire,
in week 18. Yeah, he played the whole game week 18. He was great. I don't think that happened.
Now, Rico is a 214-pound guy with a 92, a 92nd percentile explosion score.
There you go.
But Ben, the next time, but let's see what age Rico is here. He is not yet 26. Okay.
I think so.
The next time that he has a good season, it'll be the first time, which I mean makes it a cool underdog story. But this is not a player who was good in college, and it's not someone who did anything last year when Tony Pollard was awful.
Yeah, 106 touches last year, had 7 offensive touches in his career to that point. He came into the league in 2020, played some special teams in 2020 and 2022. I'm not even sure what happened in 2021. Maybe just spent the season on the practice squad. He's been with Dallas, I think, throughout, but he never recorded any official snaps in 2021. This is his 5th season in the NFL, Rico Dowdle. He was 25 last year, and again, has 113 career offensive touches, got 106 of them last year. It's not this like kind of young player. It's this 5th season special teams practice squad guy that is now quite possibly the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. It's one of the other things that's fascinating with the Jalen Tolbert thing because he hasn't done a lot in the last couple of years. I feel like if you're in on one of them, you kind of got to be on the other. You kind of have to feel like the Cowboys are into this idea of like, we're going to promote from within. We are back up here, Sean.
But Ben, it is also relevant when we think of it globally that Dowdle played 4 years from South Carolina and did not have an 800 rushing yard season in college.
Yes, and that was a long time ago anyway. Haven't been tracking the receivers particularly well, but I saw most of the I was thinking Downs at the Kendre pick, but he went. McMillan went. Wandale Robinson went. I don't have a pick here. I don't have the room open, but my late round tight ends got wiped out early in this one. Sometimes like Juwan Johnson slides to this range, but he went the 13th. Noah Fant went. Who do you like here? Will Shipley? Oh, you like Will Shipley here.
Yeah, I think this is Will Shipley or Justin Tucker.
Let's take I mean, I can take Justin Tucker too because he's got the week 14 bye. So the thing about Justin Tucker that I haven't probably told you about yet, but I realize this is going to be great. He's got a week 14 bye. The last waiver run is going to be before week 14 because it wouldn't be after week 14 because it's the sprint's weeks 15 to 17, right? So the last waiver run comes before week 14, before the final of the league playoffs, which means you can just play Tucker for 13 weeks and never carry a second quarterback, and then you pick or a kicker, and then you pick one up if you're in the league championship. Pick one up for the league championship, and so that you have 2 kickers for the sprint, which we don't always do, but often do, and so you can just kick that can all the way down the road and play Justin Tucker for 13 weeks. Never think about your kicker until the last waiver run, and then pick up your kicker too. He just went.
Sadly, he went. The other thing is that he plays before Sunday in week 1. So
you just wanted to take a peek. Yeah.
You can cut Kendre Miller and pick up a kicker for week 1.
Yeah, I had a feeling he would go here at the turn and that there was a possibility Shipley would come around. But once I got a little excited about that, you clicked Shipley. You're like,
well, we got down to 4 seconds, so I wasn't 100% sure what you were going to say.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you are the one who suggested the kicker. So
now as we come back, we have Brandon Albury and Harrison Bucker.
Butker has the same thing, the take a peek element that you're talking about. Aubrey doesn't. Kaimi Fairbairn has the week 14 thing. The Texans are going to score 9 million points. No. Did Aubrey already go? Oh, no. I opened the wrong draft. It's a slow draft. Where is... I'm in the wrong place. Who do you want to take?
Let's go with the Cowboys kicker.
All right, let's do it. He goes higher than this usually.
After all, we've already kind of come to the conclusion that the Cowboys are not going to score any short yardage touchdowns.
That's right. And we also didn't take Dak, so he's not going to throw a lot of touchdowns. And Aubrey was burying like 50 yarders all year last year. This guy was lethal.
He was definitely that rare, like massive cheat code kicker.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like Mike McCarthy's going to stop wanting to settle for field goals, but his willingness to let this guy kick from 50 yards, like, I think he's going to go for it. Aubrey had in FFPC scoring last year, he had 10 more points than Tucker, who was the second kicker. And then Tucker had 9 more points than the next kicker. So Aubrey was 1.1 points per game higher than the third kicker. The gap between the third kicker and... I mean, if you want to say 1.1 points per game from the third kicker down, it gets you to like the 18th kicker. I guess 19th, 20. I mean, there's just so many kickers that are in this like 7.5, 7.6, 7.9 points per game range. Aubrey was over 9. So he was giving you a real advantage. He somehow missed 3 extra points. I thought this guy like never missed. He had the best field goal accuracy in the league last year, or close to it. He missed only 2 kicks, but he missed 3 extra points.
Harrison Butker struggles with those extra points a little bit too.
He actually made all of them last year.
That's probably in a crucial playoff games. They're like, don't miss the extra point.
Yeah, he's definitely struggled with them before. That I recall that with him for sure. We still have 3 picks to go. At this point, we've now drafted 7 running backs, except we've only drafted 6 running backs, 2 quarterbacks, 6 receivers, 2 tight ends, 2, 6, 6, 2. Our quarterbacks are Caleb Williams and Brock Purdy. Our running backs are Bijan Robinson, Chase Brown, Nick Chubb, that stash, Kamani Vidal, that other stash, Kendre Miller, that other stash, Will Shipley, that other stash. Our receivers are Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jameson Williams, and Jerry Jeudy. Kind of like the receivers. And our tight ends are George Kittle and Brock Bowers. Like the tight ends as well. Shawn, are you worried that we have too many stash running backs? You seem to like that note.
You can never have too many running backs that you don't plan to play. That's the entire theory of fantasy football, right? Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch week 1 within the context of this draft because Chase Brown is going to need to score some points for us.
Yeah, I'm excited for Bijan Brown. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I'm even mildly not stoked about is just, getting some veterans in that 2, 3, 4 range. You go Kupp, Deebo, Kittle, and it's like, those are awesome players, but it's easy to not get as excited as you should about picks like that because it's, there's injury risk and there's so many ways you can see it going wrong, but these are really good players. And it's not hyper exciting. And yet it's probably going to be like one of our best teams. It's like, oh yeah, we just drafted the really good players. Like instead of trying to predict all the breakouts every year, we drafted the guys that are known to be really, really good at football. Later, we decided to draft, JSN and Jamison Williams and Vidal and Kendre Miller and, pretend like we're going to be able to predict all the breakouts this year. But early, we took the boring, fun players, or good players, that's what I meant. Less fun. It's a fun team overall.
It's a good mix. And, this is fairly straightforward, but I like the Robinson pick within the context of then being able to get 4 receivers that we really like and those 2 tight ends. Blair and I did a Fantasy Pros draft, and I encourage everybody who, if you're thinking about getting your feet wet, you want to win $1 million without paying the $2,000 entry. It looks like the Fantasy Pros contest might not fill, which obviously improves your take. It's the exact same thing. It's an absolute blast. You can win $1 million. Blair and I drafted from, I think, basically this exact same spot. And George Kittle and Brock Bowers went 1 pick ahead of us both times. It really wrecked the draft. To have the opposite happen here and get those guys just sets this team up to have both such a high floor and then a fantastic ceiling.
And there's other stuff in this draft, as you talk about things that like were there for us that I've kind of written off, but are actually pretty cool. I mean, the Brock Purdy thing you mentioned fell way below ADP. We get him on the team where we have Debo and Kittle. Like that's a good thing to have done. He's just a boring quarterback as well, but he's going to run a high touchdown rate. And we're going to be happy to have him attached to 2 of our top 4 picks. Probably should have been our QB target in the range where we were taking Caleb Williams instead. And we didn't have to pay for it. That's nice. We also took the Nick Chubb pick and then later got a really nice price on Jerry Jeudy, in my opinion. And I think your opinion as well. We like Jeudy. We get him at 12-10. And so we had this little mini bet on Cleveland's offense as well being, half decent this year. They play the Bengals in week 16, I believe, and we have both T. Higgins and Chase Brown as well. So there are some scenarios where we're looking at that game in the fantasy playoffs and the sprint portion of this as a fun game to shoot out. We don't even necessarily need to be playing all 4 of those players for that, right? But at some point in time or at that point in time, we'll be playing some combination of those players if this team is successful. So should be great.
Yeah, I like the mix. It's been a lot of fun to get good values on some key pieces that fit the team so perfectly. Then as we get into the middle of round 18 here, we have 3 more picks. One of them has to be a defense. We've got great balance. I don't think that there is any forcing we need to do. What are you looking to accomplish with our last 2 non-defensive selections?
That's a good question. I think in this build with Chase Brown as our RB2, Chubb, Vidal, Kendre Miller, Will Shipley. Will Shipley's a nice take a peek, but I was going to say a take a peek. So, I mean, Shipley already kind of accomplished that to a certain degree, but getting a running back that if they had a nice little game, Justice Hill's one of my options for that, but he is gone here. Deneric Prince has gone. I don't think you want to go CEH, but something that you could. I'm just comfortable starting Chase Brown week 1. Yeah, I don't feel like I have a strong answer to that question. I should have a better answer. Often in these late round spots, when I've done the ship chasing ones early, we've been able to grab a 3rd tight end. We've done it with Jawan Johnson a couple of times. Like I mentioned, he went much, much earlier in this room. We could do that with like a Theo Johnson, but I don't know that looked as great in the second preseason game. They played some Daniel Bellinger as well. I kind of took my excitement level on Theo Johnson down a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I like Miles Sanders as a bounce back play who could end up as a starter for one of these other teams. I do think it's fun to stash, and he does go right there. I do think it's fun to stash Justin Fields, even with the 2 other QBs. I mean, it seems weird, but we almost have to take Tim Patrick a little bit seriously. I think the over-the-top element of Jalem Hyatt is still borderline intriguing. Malachi Corley is one of those names where if he actually goes and has like 6 catches in week 1, you're going to be like, well, why didn't we just stash him? That would have been straightforward. And then the tight end I like, if we're going to add a third tight end, is Jatavian Sanders.
That's a lot of names that I don't see get drafted a lot. Do you want to just take a good defense here and then, or I mean, if you have one of those that you really like, then we could do it. None of those shouted to me. I mean, Fields is the most exciting, but we have Caleb and Purdy. I don't know if we want to carry 3 quarterbacks and managed. I don't know who the available defenses would even be, but we got 5 seconds. Feel free to take whoever you want.
So when you really kind of dig into the Panthers, you get the impression that Sanders is having a stealth good camp, and that might be a part of what they're looking at.
You just went quiet. You said what they're looking at, and then I lost you.
We've gotten to the point in the show where I'm just randomly pressing the mute button while I'm talking.
Just muted yourself in the middle of a point.
Let's figure out what defense we want to take here. Do you have a defense that you like?
So you took Jatavian Sanders there for anyone who may have missed it. I was thinking to take a peak defense would make sense. But KC went. Baltimore has gone. You have Green Bay. Philly went. You could take Green Bay against Philly in Brazil.
That's the play that I like.
Okay, let's do that. So let's talk through a few of those other later round options you mentioned. Malachi Corley goes here. Miles Sanders also went to a drafter who has made some auto picks here down the stretch. He took both Miles Sanders and Malachi Corley in the last 2 rounds. 2 names that I would not have attached to you prior to this draft, and yet somehow that person was on and you were also on. Miles Sanders, I like broadly as a bounce back. Like, I actually think it's not being discussed enough. Like, he has the potential to play a little bit early with Chuba because they're going to bring Jonathan Brooks along fairly slowly. And so, and Miles Sanders is still there. And so it wouldn't be that surprising. The Corley one, he's had a really bad camp. He played a lot in this last, or he supposedly had not a great camp. There's some issues with his route running at one point. I've heard some stuff about hands. And then this last preseason
Neither of those things are important if you're the yak king. You're not trying to emphasize those other parts of it. You're going to go stand, they're going to lateral you the ball, and then you're going to yak it.
You're going to yak it. The Tim Patrick thing was intriguing too. He goes, I moved Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin down my rankings and added Tim Patrick and Josh Reynolds. And they're all now just ranked in vaguely the same area. I don't know. I mean, the Mims and Franklin thing is such a bummer. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like Patrick and Josh Reynolds are just going to play with Cortland Sutton a lot. But I don't know that they're going to be reliable. I mean, I love the way the Bo Nix has looked. I'm getting really excited about the Bo Nix underdog exposure, he's my highest drafted player. So I'm getting. We've talked, Sean, all it's literally since the draft about how the fit was going to look, and we've seen it in the 2 preseason games. They've scored on every drive that he's been under center, other than one that I think Lucas Kroll fumbled after the catch, but he had scoring drives in his other 4 possessions in the first preseason game, both of his possessions in the second preseason game. Threw a touchdown to Tim Patrick on one of those, threw a touchdown to Javonte Williams on the other one, but it got called back for being.
He's like, you'll never stop me if you let me throw it a yard and a half across the line of scrimmage.
He can do whatever he wants. He can throw from wherever he wants. But what we saw once again that I loved so much was it's what Peyton wants your offense to look like, the staying on schedule stuff, right? Like we often used to make fun of that. You want to go for explosives, but now defenses take away explosives. And we used to make fun of retread head coach hires, but Sean Payton is a unique one where the NFL moved back around to where Sean Payton's whole thing about like staying on schedule and doing it in these efficient ways is perfect for the modern NFL. And now he has a quarterback who's perfect for that as well. They ran the ball effectively, then they would do the short passing and all of that. And I saw some commentary about Knick's ADOT was very low. Well, if you watched him, he was low when he needed to be to help move the ball. When he had a 3rd and 9, he ripped one into Tim Patrick beyond the sticks. Unlike some of these other guys, like a Russell Wilson, who will throw deep on early downs and can't hit anyone deep. And then on 3rd and 18, he's completing underneath, way short of the sticks. On 3rd down, Bo Nix actually throws beyond the sticks. They got into a 1st and 20 after a hold. He scrambled for 10, set up 2nd and 10, and then on 2nd and 10, ripped one to Cortland Sutton for 19 yards, right? When you're behind the sticks, he's willing to take those throws. That's something we talked about. You talked about pre-draft back in April about why you had him ranked so highly, that when you control for the downfield passing, he's good at that as well. And those elements of it, knowing when you have to take those throws and being able to do them accurately in the second preseason game was so appealing, in addition to doing all the underneath stuff that Sean Payton wants you to do. They're going to be a good offense, man. Like, I'm going to bet their win total over that. I was just looking at the other day. It did move up. I think it started at 4.5. It went to 5.5. Like, they're going to win more than 5.5 games. They're going to probably go like 8 and 9 or something, like they did last year with Russell Wilson when Sean Payton was hiding Russell Wilson all year. This offense is actually they're going to be better. They're going to have a quarterback that doesn't stop Sean Payton from running the offense the way that he wants to. That was a really exciting preseason week 2 takeaway. And I think you're right about the Patrick thing. If he's going to play, but I do think a lot of it's going to be underneath. I worry how much weekly ceiling the different wide receivers are going to have and how it all manifests. I'm really into the running backs. I'm seeing your vision on Jaleel McLaughlin lately as well. We talked about him earlier in the offseason. I wasn't as excited about the snap share role, but I want all of them. Obviously very into Javonte, who I thought looked okay, but not necessarily great. And Jaleel McLaughlin is just so explosive, man.
He looks good. I mean, I would have the same basic take that I have for the Xavier Worthy thing, which is that it's exciting and fun, and it makes you it takes you out of that zone where you're nervous about the worst case scenario. It takes you out of that Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin kind of category.
Right.
But I mean, these teams and these specific players are doing against defenses that are not trying. It's a very different thing against a real NFL secondary that's scheming to try and trick you. Having said that, I mean, all of those things you said, that touchdown pass he threw in the last game, even just that pass did not look like one that you see from a ton of NFL quarterbacks, and it's exactly the type of play he made at Oregon.
Right. He ran the offense like he ran the offenses at Oregon. I mean, it's in full command. I hear your point. The defenses are going to be a lot more difficult. I think Sean Payton is helpful in that regard and is going to scheme things up like that touchdown play where they had a leak. They had, a sprint right. It looks like the running back's the first option. He's running to the pylon, but Tim Patrick's coming from the left side of the formation, leaks underneath the offensive line, and is now running like in traffic, but is trailing behind the running back who looks like who the defenders are flowing towards by like 8 yards. And he just has to throw on the move and get it into that little window, but does it effortlessly. Like you said, it just hits Tim Patrick there. It's a short passing TD. It's a low ADOT pass, but that's exactly what you have to be able to do to run, Sean Payton's type of offense. Throw on the move a little bit. It's not an easy short pass. It is a little bit of a tricky one. We're back up. Tim Patrick did go. I spent the whole time in between these picks talking about Bo Nix for some reason.
I put him in
unless you want to draft Bo Nix. What was that?
I put him in the queue for you. The listeners can tell that we obviously don't care about this pick. The people currently in the queue are Justin Fields, Jalen Hyatt, Carson Steele, Isaac Guerrero, DJ Chark, and Bo Nix.
Oh my God. I don't think there's a pick there. The Carson Steele thing is so funny. He's a white dude with flowing blonde locks, number 42. I thought I was going to see some anyway, we could do him as a take a peek if you want, but I'm kind of not into the Steele. You want to take Hyatt? You like Hyatt. I thought
Do you want to take Isaac Guerrero?
Okay.
Do you want to take Justin Fields?
Okay. I have no reason not to take either of those guys. I really don't care about this pick, as people can tell. We take Fields. If he wins the starting job week 1, that's a good pick. The reality is we're going to cut this guy after week 1. We should be taking an upside swing at this point, but we're close enough to the start of the season that no one's playing anymore in the preseason. Preseason week 3 is coming around. Hate to break it to all you guys, but we have all the information we're going to get.
So Guerendo is someone that I have been emphasizing, and I think has a little bit of that same, and I say emphasizing in terms of reminding people he's there, not necessarily picking him, because there's a similar element to the Kendre Miller conversation we had, with the obvious caveat that he is in a loaded backfield to where it almost doesn't matter who the backup to Christian McCaffrey is. But we just went through a time period where Jordan Mason deservedly generated a lot of buzz because the other backs were out. Now we're about to flip that, where Guerendo is coming back to practice and the other players are a little bit dinged up. There's the potential with Guerendo being such an extraordinary athlete that he flips a lot of that narrative very quickly. And that's one of the things that I do like to talk through on these 0 RB countdown pieces. Not that you're going to be right, not that the scenario you're thinking in your head is going to play out, but that you need to be working through why certain people are rising, why certain people are falling, and how sometimes that's divorced from the realities of how a fantasy season would manifest in a way that helps your team. So I think that's a potentially fun, potentially relevant thing to mention at the end as we think through where the upside might be for certain players.
Yeah, no, we took Justin Fields for the listeners. That was Shawn explaining why we should have taken somebody we didn't take. Our final team is Bijan Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and we had all these Niners too, Shawn. Adding Guerendo makes sense. We're kind of betting against McCaffrey as it is. We have Deebo and Kittle, as I mentioned. We have T. Higgins, Brock Bowers, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. We got Chase Brown to slide to us in the 8th. That's another one I didn't mention a little bit ago when I said there were some spots where some things fell right for us. Chase Brown in the 8th, a very nice one after a lot of other running backs were gone. The next backs after Brown were Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Brian Robinson, Rico Dowdle, Jerome Ford. All those other dudes were gone. Jalen Warren, Tony Pollard, all of that. Brown is typically going above many of them. So it was very cool to see him slide there. After Brown, we got Jameson Williams, Nick Chubb, Caleb Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Kamani Vidal, Brock Purdy, Kendre Miller, Will Shipley, Brandon Aubrey, Jatavian Sanders, who we didn't get a lot of time to talk about there, Shawn, but was a guy that I was impressed with. I actually sought out his 2 catches in preseason week 2, just wanted to see what he looked like. The first one was a little kind of leak out pass he caught, turned upfield, and then he lowered his shoulder on a guy on the sideline, a DB, which he didn't break the tackle or anything, but certainly was willing to get physical. But he was bigger and faster, I guess, than I was prepared for. And he's a big, fast tight end. So that's good. Green Bay defense, Justin Fields. So Caleb, Brock Purdy, and Justin Fields were our 3 QBs. Bijan, Chase Brown, Nick Chubb, Kamani Vidal, Kendre Miller, and Will Shipley are the 6 running backs. Shipley, a little bit of a take a peek. Hopefully he has 30 points in that Brazil game. Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, JSN, Jameson Williams, Jerry Jeudy were the receivers. And then we went Kittle, Bowers, and Jatavian Sanders, Aubrey, Green Bay defense. I read it chronologically. I read it positionally. What do you think about the team?
I'm afraid to say, because I'm going to get knocked for some over enthusiasm. But then we got all of our targets at a discount. And then we added 2 hybrid QBs and the most efficient QB in the NFL, who also matches up with the receivers we have. It seems like a good team. Is that the wrong way to look at it?
I wasn't trying to make you feel like I didn't like our team either. I I love the team. There's a couple like minor things that, when you do your first main with your buddy that you draft a bunch of mains with every year, you want everything to break exactly the right way. A lot of it did. And then because of that, I'm even more like, I wish this team had Kincaid in the second round when we have, the Chase Brown value and we got the JSN thing and we got the Bowers at 6'10 and all these other things. I love having Vidal. I was so excited about that pick and all these other elements. No, I mean, it's an obviously great team. It's very similar to what you had said early on where, you were working on your 0RB piece and you were, we have a tendency when we work on these things to feel like it has to be absolutely perfect and every prediction has to be exactly correct. And that's the absolute wrong way to think about it. We're not going to get every single prediction correct. I had the best year of my fantasy life last year. A ton of teams did really, really well across a lot of different stuff for me. I was super ecstatic about it. And when I went back and looked at some of my predictions from last year, getting ready for this year with Stealing Signal stuff, I got a ton of stuff really wrong. Like there was so much stuff that was wrong. I was really into Rashad Penny last year. There's plenty that you're going to miss on. That's not the point of fantasy football. You're going to have your misses. It's about the hits. It's about stacking those things. It's also about humility. It's about understanding that even if you don't get the most exciting pick in every single round, there are spots where you can see things, and they do go that way sometimes. There's things every NFL season that surprise the heck out of us. There's other things that are not surprising, but we just weren't playing as much. I probably haven't been playing Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel as much as I would like to. I'm actually really glad to have them as a core of a team that I really like in that regard. So there's, all of Brock Purdy's another example of that. He could throw 40 touchdowns this year, and it would surprise absolutely no one. And yet I haven't drafted much of him at all because it's just he's kind of pricey for a guy who doesn't run a lot, and they're as a team going to run a lot. So the pass yardage doesn't actually get super, super high. He's so efficient, but it's going to be like low 4,000s in pass yardage instead of, potentially 5,000 with like a Stroud or something like that. But having him in this build and stacked with both a Debo and a Kittle, I'm not looking to sell off my equity in this team, Sean. I think it's a fantastic team.
It's pretty fun. I appreciate you being on board with, the thing in this draft is that Brock Bowers actually fell way below ADP. And so that was fantastic. It was fun to go ahead and get JSN, to have Chase Brown fall. I know that you already mentioned that, but thinking through those two things together, Ben, as you mentioned Sanders late, and we spent so much time talking about other things that we weren't prepared for that pick. So we just made that one. Jatavian Sanders led the Texas Longhorns among, starting players in yards per route last season. And this is a team that has Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, and it also has like the biggest sleeper in football right now in Jordan Whittington. I made the comparison in a piece a couple days ago, not to say that it's going to happen the same way, but it's easy to see the Sanders-Theo Johnson deal as being similar to what the Cowboys have with Jake Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker, where the guy who's freakishly athletic is not that relevant, and the player who's good at football is good at football. Jatavian Sanders, Theo Johnson, two very different players from a production perspective, very different players from an athleticism perspective. We know how important the athleticism is at tight end, and yet, we're just talking about guys who probably, just in fairness, should not be compared in an apples-to-apples way when you're thinking about the age-adjusted and experience-adjusted trajectory of Sanders. Doesn't mean he'll hit, but we did, and we don't need him to hit. He's a good fit for this team where we have the two elite tight ends. I do like being able to take a look at him in week one. This has been fantastic. We've gotten the main event season off to a great start. Then I'm hoping to do another draft with you of some type, maybe the BBT, maybe a Superflex tournament, maybe another main event. But this should be a fantastic week, and we'll look for some more of these opportunities.
Yeah, this was a blast. We were both working and writing today at a time when we normally record. We decided to jump in a main in the afternoon slot to get something recorded for the show, but also because we want to be drafting these teams. it's a fun team. I'm really excited to see how it plays out. I really like the way the build came together again in the late rounds. I mean, I just keep looking back at it, and it's like a lot of the guys that I do want to have exposure to, the Vidal and Kendra Miller guys that I mentioned having, we've both talked about on the show, both having a lot of on Underdog, and to get them into your main event exposure early on is great at good prices. It would have been nice to get them even cheaper, as you mentioned. I like the Nick Chubb play too. I maybe didn't sound so excited about that, but I mean, get a little bit of a discount on. You don't want to bet against Nick Chubb. You don't want to bet against Nick Chubb, right? So this is a blast, and we'll look to do another draft soon.
Awesome. Well, this has been a special FFPC main event draft version of Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. Make sure you are following him at Yards Per Gretch, at Stealing Signals, at Stealing Lines, and the new Stealing Signals YouTube. We're hoping to do some shows there together, and by shows I mean drafts where we compete for $1 million. We'd love for you to get over there and subscribe, click notification, give them some likes, all of those types of things. The preseason week 2 reactions are up. The Stealing Signals division by division reports are up, and Ben also has a bunch of fantastic strategy sessions that will fit your home league and what other types of drafts you're going to be doing over these next couple of weeks. Make sure you get over there and check those out. We'd also love to have you at RotoViz. The guys are cranking out a huge amount of content per day, but there's almost not room for the article a day that I have promised. Coupon code there, RV Radio 2024 at checkout for 10% off your 1-year subscription. Leave us a rating and review. Those help us a ton. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.